Hey guys, this is a video for you if you're specifically asking questions about how I built the Phazer, and you'll be happy to see that this is where it is. Yeah, that's where she is, next to the Duramax running boards, under the chicken wire and the tarp and the tomato cages, slowly becoming part of the yard. Before we get into this, I just want to say, when I first started building this unit here, I was green. I wasn't much of a mechanic when I first started. I learned a lot of things along the way. So are there better ways to do things? Are there things that I would change now, having more skill in that field? Yeah, there's things I would do differently for sure. But I'll show you what I did, and you can kind of take that idea. You can do it that way. You can maybe use it to help think up your own thing of what you're gonna do. But modifying phasers now seems to be the thing to do. A lot of guys have been doing it. I want to actually get something different and build something other than a phaser. I'd like to build like not on a land that's been done. I was kind of thinking like a what do you call those old things, an LT gray or something like that, because they're cool looking. Excuse me while I get her all dug out of the junk pile. So I probably already have a few people mad on the way I store this thing, but it's my sled and I'll do with it what I want. I feel like I made a video on this once already, but maybe I didn't really show what I did. So I'm gonna go over this now, head to toe on this unit, and I'll show you exactly how I put everything together and things that I would do differently now that I'm a little more seasoned. Because I started building this like 8 years, no, longer than that. Actually, no, that's not right. It would be 10 years ago. So yeah, I started building this like maybe 10 years ago as a newbie mechanic. And yeah, there's definitely things I do different now. So I'll just start at the front and we will work our way back. All right, so we will start up front here with the skis. They are a little bit full of mud. The skis are from a 2015 Arctic Cat M8000. I did have to do a little bit of modification in here to get them to fit. They sit maybe an inch and a half higher than the stock skis. There is a rubber in here that I kind of cut to fit, and then I had to find a bolt that was the right size. And actually, you know what? For the most part, I'm using all the stock hardware. The only thing that I really had to change here to get this ski to fit was that the rubbers for this ski, the ski dampeners, and you can't really see them, I had to kind of cut and shape myself for that ski to work. But after I did that, they went on fine. Yeah, on this side you can see the rubber a little bit in there. This was a little bit of custom forming and custom shaping just on the ski as well as the rubber, just kind of to try to get that to fit in and it also be a tight fit and the ski wasn't loose and floppy. And I also took out the sway bar as well. So the sway bar would go through here and then connect up to this mount here, and that is your sway bar assembly, and I took that out as well. The only part I would do there a little bit differently is I would put a spacer in to lift the ski up maybe another inch, inch and a half, maybe as far as 2 inches. I have to do my measuring, and just to get the front end a little bit up, because it's kind of hard to tell how it's sitting. But the front end does sit a little bit lower than I'd like. It does help with that that Arctic Cat ski. It helps lift it up a little bit more, but it's still maybe a little low in the front. So that's one thing I would do differently, is I would find a way to probably lift that ski up an inch, whether it's put a spacer in there or by some other means. Today you're going to really learn how much of a rat rod this thing really is. Next item on the list, I'll try to go over everything from front to back so I don't miss anything. This was a vent I put in because there was cracking on the hood, and since then actually the cracking's got worse and I've hit a few things with it. So yeah, there is some hood cracking going on, and that's kind of why I put this here, because there was a little bit of a crack there, so I cut it out just to keep the crack from propagating, and that worked for a while until I was a little too rough with it, and it's still going, but it does help keep the clutch a little bit cooler than it would otherwise. Air intake is one I get asked a lot of questions on. Do you guys remember that 2017 Mountain Cat that I built? This is literally the exact same pod. Like, this is the pod that I used on that 2017 Mountain Cat, and I just refit it to fit on the Phazer. So yep, pod there, and this is actually a really simple design. I'm gonna try to show it the best I can because I get asked a lot of questions on this. So I think this is a 2-inch piece of PVC piping, and literally, this is so easy. All I did was drill a hole here for the 2-inch PVC so that it could go down, and then it fits into a boot that goes into the stock intake. This was a very, very easy thing to do. I just kind of used what I had around the garage. So yeah, it's just an intake boot and some PVC piping that goes to the stock. Like down there, that down there, I have to move my hand so you can see what I'm talking about. That down there is stock. So the reason I did it here and not on the hood, obviously, is so that you can open and close the hood. So pretty easy. I just lined it up, took my hole saw, driller, PVC pipe, measured it down into the intake with a boot, and that's it. That's how I did that. Pretty easy. This is just the K&N snow charging filter, sock rather, with the unifilter on the spring on the inside. So that's flexible, and if you roll it or whatever, nothing's gonna happen. I'm not sure if I would have done too much different there. I feel like that's pretty much the way that it needs to be, the way that it should be. So yeah, I'm happy with the air intake being set up like that. That's actually one of the few things I wouldn't change on this. We'll go on to the light now because I've had definitely a few questions on that. This is actually a pretty easy hookup. So all I did was go down. This is literally just mounted the plastic. That's all it is. So it's not like the sturdiest mount. I don't really know what else I would do differently besides maybe mount the light on the handlebars or the risers somehow. But anyway, the way I did it was I went through this little access port, and then all it is the stock wiring, because obviously there's no windshield, there's no factory headlight on this anymore. So that was kind of part of all that. Deleting that part of the gauge cluster, the windshield, the headlight, all that stuff, and this is kind of what you're left with. I'll talk about the bars and the riser and the mounting setup in just a second here. Yeah, so that's just the stock wiring that I just wanted to go down here to make it kind of neat. Didn't want to make more holes than necessary, I guess, so I didn't drill through right here. I just drilled through the plastic covering right there, and this is just actually wired up to the high-low switch. Now, this has seen better days, but well, it did work. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yeah, that's just the high-low switch, so that's just on and off now. It's not high-low anymore, it's on-off, because I only have it hooked up to one of the circuits. So I've got a empty circuit in there for the low beam assembly. So yeah, that still uses the same switch for your lights. If I were to do this part differently, I'd probably do a few things. I'd probably mount this light, and I've never used this thing in the dark, by the way. I'd probably mount this light to the bars or the riser up here. As well as I'd get a little more powerful of a light, or one with a ballast, because this one tends to flicker a little bit, and you'll see that with two-stroke lights that don't have a ballast in them, is you get on-off power. So on-off, on-off, on-off. It's just the way the stator works. You don't get constant power, so the frequency that the stator puts out kind of makes the light flicker a little bit, especially noticeable at a lower RPM. So I would get probably a little bit better of a light than this one is what I'd do if I were to do something else differently. Let's move on to the handlebars now, because the handlebars are definitely one of the most asked questions, or the riser itself, I should say, is definitely one of the most asked I get. There is actually a little bit going on here, so I'll start by talking about the riser and the steering post first, and then we'll go on to the handlebars and controls. So the steering post, this is where things had to be modified a little bit to try to get to everything works. This Phazer comes with a stock. This is the stock part. It's the flat bracket. I had too much trouble. It would have been a lot of trouble to find a post that mounts to this directly, and then you wouldn't be able to adjust the tilt of the post, as well as these are nuts that are welded on the bottom, so you'd have to drill it out and then screw up from the bottom into the post. It would have been kind of a pain. I guess you could have also had long enough bolts to go all the way through the post. You could have done that too, but this is the way that I chose to go with it. So what I had to do here was that I actually welded on a T-bar. So this is a T-bar that's welded onto the flat post, and then the T-bar goes all the way through, and then from there all I had to do was find this riser that I wanted to use, which I believe is a PowerMad. I think it's a 10-inch riser. It's pretty big. So this is Arctic Cat hardware. These clamps on the bottom, I had to, just because the base plate, the stock base plate was so wide, I had to trim them just a tiny little bit here to get the clamp around that stock. There, you can see it right back here. I had to trim that clamp just a little bit here to get it to clear the stock steering post, the flat post, with the flat top. So then all I had to do was just simply clamp it on and tighten it up, and we were good to go. What I would do differently there, probably not a whole lot besides make it a little cleaner looking. That would be really all about that's about all I would do, is just clean it up a little bit and just make it so that those steel edges aren't showing, and it needs a paint job as well. It's starting to get a little rusty down there. Ooh, I hope you enjoy all the spider webs and stuff like that. Anyway, PowerMad, I believe it was the 10-inch riser, then stock Arctic Cat clamping hardware. The bars are from a 2014 Series M. I had to do a little trimming with the rubber here and here because the riser was a little wider than the stock riser, so no big deal. I just trimmed off the rubber and it bolted right on, easy. And then here's where things started to get a little messy, is I had to trim the mountain bar, the hook off of this side, and you can see it's still on that side. And the reason I had to do that is because the throttle assembly slides on. This assembly breaks in half, and you can just clamp it on however, but the throttle assembly slides over the bar. So with that hook in the edge of the bar, like you see on this side, the throttle wouldn't go over the edge of the hook, and you can see it's still a little curved, a little bit there from where that hook would start. But yeah, that's what I had to do there to get that throttle. You could have went with a different throttle, but this is what I had to work with that day. Honestly, what I'd do differently there would probably be just use a different throttle assembly. This one still has the kill switch on it, and the kill switch still works like a regular kill switch. So you could get one that either a throttle that's split, or you could just do it the way I did it, and that's the way I chose to do it. But there are cleaner ways to do it, yes. Pretty easy to see from here that the brake lever is not really in the right place, and I wish I could have it more to the right, but that would actually require a longer brake lever. A longer brake cable. That's what that would require. So when you turn the bars, obviously that cable shifts around, and it gets to be a little too short when the bars are at full crank in the stock position. I also had to get this even to work, I had to route the cable through directly through that fascia, just to get it directly to the brake. which is right there. So I just chose a more direct route to get it to the brake rather than get a longer cable, but getting a longer cable would probably be the way to go. So that's why that looks like that. And the same reason for this is that these cables, they're better to be loose rather than catching on things. Throttle cable actually I never had a problem with. Throttle cable is kind of the one I was worried about, but the throttle cable is actually plenty long enough to do this. It's the brake cable that ends up being a little too short, as well as some of these other ones, but they're fine. You just kind of have to deal with them being in the way like that. You could extend that or change the connectors. If you went back and changed the kill switch, then obviously this wouldn't be a problem, but that's what I had to do there. Keep in mind while I'm going over everything in this video is that I didn't have a template or anything to work off of. I was just literally looking at parts on the sled and figuring out how everything had to go together to make it work. So this at the time was what I did, and I do things differently today for sure, yes. Let's do the tunnel next. We'll do the tunnel and then we'll do the skid last, because the skid is a little more complex. I think there's a little more measuring and stuff that has to happen there, but we'll do the tunnel now. It is good to have the tunnel and the skid at the same time, just so you can measure out exactly how long your tunnel extension needs to be, or even doing the skid first. But I'll talk about the tunnel. I think I did the skid first, but I'll talk about the tunnel right now. So this is I don't even know what this tunnel is off of. This is part of the parts I did on this that I got for free. There's a number of parts that I got for free, and that's why they're on there. The handlebars were free, the skis were free, the bumper, the tunnel was free. The skid I actually had to pay for. I actually bought that. But a lot of these parts are free, and since I had free parts, I just kind of made them work. I don't know what the tunnel is off of. I think it may be a cat tunnel, because I know they use these mounts for some factory mounting, so like a rack or whatever. But it was very wide. It felt like it was for a 16-inch wide track, and I'll go over that in a sec, what I had to do there to make it fit. So the tunnel was about 1.5 inches wider than it needed to be, and to remedy that, all I did was I literally just cut down the middle of the tunnel and then riveted it back together. It's not pretty. If I were to do that differently, I'd get a tunnel that fit and wasn't too wide and didn't have to have that seam in the middle of it. But that's how this one went together, and that's how it is. The bumper, I don't know if it's a 153 or a 162 Pro Climb bumper, but the bumper is the whole integrity of the rear end, just like how it is on an Arctic Cat, a Pro Climb chassis, as well as the Ascender chassis. The bumper is the complete rigidity of the tunnel. It's not like a Polaris or a Do where the tunnel is all the strength. All the strength, just like a Cat, is built into this bumper, which actually worked out well for me in building this, because it's turned out to be super solid. So after putting the skid in, because I did the skid in first, I just measured out kind of where everything needed to be, and yeah, just kind of went to mounting. So I use rivets from the back, a few bolts. Of course, I use a flathead on the back so that it doesn't rip up the track, a carriage bolt that is, and just riveted and just made sure that it was a little too strong. I didn't do any chopping on the stock phaser tunnel. The phaser tunnel was already in pretty bad shape, so that's actually completely stock. That's how that goes together. It just kind of bolts on to the existing chassis, so I didn't have to do any extra cutting. That's why a lot of it looks kind of ugly and bent, because I kind of was just using what I had to save money. I think I'll say, including buying this machine, the track, the skid, the riser, the ski, like everything that you see, everything that I've gone over so far, and we're not done yet because I just forgot we still got to do the drivers. I know we still got to do the skid. I'm probably into this whole thing for $1,000, and that includes buying it off my dad for I think 500, and then maybe 500 other parts. So oh yeah, I'm only like maybe $1,000 into this thing, and that's why it's put together the way it is, because I didn't want to have to spend a lot of money. Okay, I think here's where I really splurged. I think I spent $300 for the track and skid combined. So that's like, besides buying the sled, which was like $400, that was the biggest bill on this thing, was the track and skid. So let's go over the track and skid now. Okay, I tipped it on its side here so we can get a little bit better of a look at things here. So the skid is actually a Polaris part. This thing has Arctic Cat parts, Yamaha parts, Polaris parts, and it may have Skidoo parts depending on where that tunnel came from. Very suspicious of it being a 16-inch wide tunnel, which is the tracks that Skidoo rides. This skid is a 159 track skid off of a 01, I believe, vertical escape. So that's all that this is. I mean, it's a complete skid assembly. I didn't really do anything special here besides the mounting, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's got scratchers and everything, all that stuff that you don't really need because this is an air-cooled unit. So let's talk about the mounting real quick. So the mounting is, you can see that hole in the front there. That is just the stock mounting position. So the one thing you don't want to do, and you can see right up there, there is a little more bracing and stuff like that. The sheet metal is actually dual layered and maybe even triple layered there. I don't know. Can't remember if there's one in the back. But anyway, there's a lot more sturdiness here than over here because you got two pieces of sheet metal that are bound together directly to, I guess if you want to call it the bulkhead or whatever. This is all measuring. It depends on what skid that you've decided to mount. You have to figure this out for yourself. You have to figure out how you want the sled to sit. There's definitely better ways to do this. This is just what I did for now. But besides that, the front part of the skid actually bolts right up. This is what went on in the back. This is the rear skid mount. Yeah, there's the stock mount because I put a bolt through it. What I have here is a bracket that I used to mount to the skid location. I didn't want to use the stock mount hole because the skid would sit too low in the chassis, and I didn't like that. I meant to go around and clean this up. This is just some additional bracing, and I meant to go around the angle grinder to go snip, 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 and make this a little bit cleaner. It's sturdy. It just it needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but again, this is going to be something that you're going to have to play with if you decide to take on a project like this. I think there's a company that makes a lift for the stock mounting hardware. With this longer skid, it had to go back 6 inches as well as down 2. So again, measuring depending on how you want it to sit, and you have to build a brace for the back. That's kind of just how it is. I will give you a tip for mounting the skid, however, minus the measurements and stuff you got to do. That's stuff you got to figure out on your own. One thing you're going to want to do is with the adjusters, that being these things here. What you're going to want to do when you go to mounting your skid is you're going to want to loosen these off almost all the way, like maybe leave yourself like a 1/2 inch of tension on them. So that way, when you go to mount your skid, you can simply, like after you get all the measurements and everything and you get it all figured out, chances are once you mount it, it's going to be a little too loose. I just tighten that up, got the track tension set, and it looks a little wonky the way it's sitting right now. But if you loosen these almost all the way, leave yourself maybe 1/2 inch or something like that to play with, maybe a little more. That way you'll be able to get that track set the way you need it, and you don't end up having these, say you had this all the way tight, you go to mount your track, and then you'll have probably a little bit of free play because it won't be perfect, and then you go to tighten it and you run out, then you're stuck with having to remount the whole skid because the track ain't gonna change shape for you. When it comes to skid mounting, I probably would have done a lot of things very differently. I wouldn't have changed the location, but I would have changed the hardware that I used. Especially the rear one I'm not too concerned about. It just really needs to be cleaned up. It just kind of looks ugly, but it's tough. The front one needs a little help. It's not as sturdy as it should be. It's already seeing some stress just from riding it, and I have been jumping it and stuff like that. But it needs to be a little tougher. If I were to do that differently, and I may have to before I rip the whole chassis out, is make that a little tougher because it's not tough enough. Let's go on to the drivers now, shall we? Oh, the drivers. Yes, the drivers. This is the stock drive shaft. However, these are not the stock drivers. I had to drop them a 2 size. So what do we have in there now? 2, 4, 6, 7. So I went from an 8 to a 7. Of course, that does change your gearing a little bit. It is geared a little bit lower now, which I'm not actually crazy about. But it's really the only way that this 2-inch track is going to fit in. And there's more to it than that. You actually need to, as well, and you can see that I beat the ever-living snot out of it, the front end, with a hammer. This isn't enough to just do the drivers. You have to basically massage out the front of the front of the tunnel, the front of the chassis, the bulkhead, if you will. And you can really see how far that I stretched it down here. So yeah, I just kind of worked that with a hammer and a chunk of wood and just kind of worked it, and that's the only way that there's actually enough clearance there for the track to wrap around those drivers, as well as not contact the front of the tunnel or the bulkhead, whichever you prefer. Another thing that you're gonna have to watch out for when you're mounting this skid, and this also has to do with the drivers, is that this piece moves independently from this piece. So as your suspension flexes, you have to make sure that your slide rail end cap isn't going to take a dive into the drivers. And I know mine kind of looks close. No, it's not. That is one thing that you really have to be sure of, is mounting this skid, the whole skid, far enough back so that when you bounce around in your suspension or take a big hit or something like that, that your slide rail end caps do not plow right into your drivers. You can't have that happen. Yeah, honestly, it's probably just gonna sit here in the yard and hang out for a little bit, right, doggy? Just like you. Hopefully that gives you guys some ideas. There's certainly better ways to do it. If you want to spend the money, I'm into this thing for like 800 to 1,000 bucks, including buying the unit. So I'm in a happy place with it. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm gonna wrap this thing back up, and it's gonna continue to hang out here under the tarps. So thanks everybody for watching today's video. If you have any more questions, leave them down there in the comments, and I'll see if I can help you along. Like I said, there's a lot of measuring, a lot of stuff you just got to figure out. Not every skid mount is going to be the same. Not every ski mounting is going to be the same. Not every riser is going to be the same. So before you go and decide to take on a project like this, it's a lot of just looking at something, figuring it out, and solving how you're going to do it yourself. Now that I am a much more seasoned mechanic, sure, there's tons of stuff that I would do differently to make it prettier, for sure. But thanks everybody for watching. I'm going to wrap her up again, and we'll see everybody in the next one real soon. Bye, everybody.